it's only a matter of time before that West will be stopped from dominating by the rest of the world, and it will fall apart from the inside. There are tons of people in this part of the world who no longer believes that they have any influence, and that is dangerous. And it's incompatible with democracy. So prepare the future, a global governance, democratic governance, where people can freely express their wishes for the future and are taken into a global dialogue, and we vote for it and we go in the direction that the majority want to go. And that's democracy. The most important thing about democracy is taking the minorities into account. Democracy is not just to do what the majority says. If you have 51%, it doesn't mean that you can ignore the 49. We don't need any kind of majority dictatorship, even if it's democratic. We need the justice, the fairness, the equality that is also mentioned in the Panchila from 54 that I mentioned before. Peaceful coexistence is about taking the others into account when you make a decision yourself. It's not just even if you are the biggest or the strongest or you have the majority to do whatever you please. We have raw, pragmatic politics that leads to hell. When I was young, which is many years ago, the Nordic countries where I live, the Nordic, what we normally see as Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Greenland, were countries where we had a lively idea, or if you will, ideological debate. We talked about what is the welfare state, what is the purpose of the state vis-a-vis the people. What will the future look like if we do this and if we do that? And of course, people are disagreeing on what was a good society. But without that type of idea debate, we're also lost completely. There's no guiding lines anymore if you don't know what you do, and if you don't know why you do what you do. It becomes panic, helter-skelter, knee-jerk reactions, as we saw, for instance, when Russia did its limited military operation into Ukraine, we said, oh, look at that, it's out of the blue, it's unprovoked, and now we got to punish this country and this man. They didn't even make an analysis of what the economic sanctions would be, have for what implications the economic sanctions, which are the hardest in human history, would have on our own society. I mean, some of us predicted, what happens if we cannot import, gas anymore from, and what happens if you bomb Nord Stream and things like that. I mean, what about thinking at least a few months ahead? But the alcoholic does not think months ahead. The alcoholic looks at the half bottle that is still left and drinks it. And then tomorrow you wake up with a hangover and say, I did it again. And my future is not going to get better from it. That's where we are today. In my view, it's my view. I'm not saying it's the whole truth, but it's part of the truth. Some of what I've said may sound to you like I'm a pessimist. I'm not a pessimist. I believe in people's will, vision, and hard work. But I am a pessimist when it comes to the short term, the next few years, in which we are coming closer. I would be an idiot if I didn't tell you. We are coming closer to the risk of a major war in Europe. But I'm saying it doesn't have to go that far. But the idea I have is if we get through this, and if we can hope for the US empire and NATO to disappear, and the United States will flourish, etc., and we find other ways of talking with each other about conflicts, I think there's so much we can build on in the world. There's such an energy from the billions of people who live. There's so many good things that have happened the last 30, 40 years, not the least China's development. I mean, I was in China first time in 1983. I saw how poor it was, partly how dirty it was, how underdeveloped it was. And I'm now going frequently to China. I'm seeing what a fantastic society it is in many ways. Deeply impressive. The West is not interested. The West is not even curious. How you uplift 700 million people from poverty is not interested for Americans, who still have 20% at least living under the poverty line. You'll hear Mr. Biden and everybody else say, oh, we've done a lot to solve this problem. We set off $10 billion to solve it, right? It doesn't help. It doesn't help. You decided to change your society such that you could uplift 700 million people. You did not just pour money into poor people who didn't know how to spend it, but you gave them education, you gave them opportunities, you listened to them. I mean, all these things are quality development, whereas the West is thinking in terms of quantity development. Everything is measured by money. So the idea is, could we have a discussion at some point about global ethics? A global ethic would mean something like sustainability, of course, in a serious sense of that word. Don't do anything that makes, in the long run, that's a time perspective, our common living on this globe unsustainable. And here you have to particularly think of those who are disadvantaged, not the people at Wall Street, not the rich people in every capital of the world. And finally, well, there's much more to say about it, of course, but finally it would mean, and that's a very interesting angle to future new democracy, can you take the non-born, the not yet born people into your consideration? Because from a time perspective, everything we do will influence future generations. So simply put, could we take into account those who are not yet born and ask, what I do now, is that a good thing or a bad thing for those who come 3 or 4 generations after me? They cannot vote, they cannot voice their concerns. And that's something which is very difficult for particularly Westerners, because that is what we call a non-reciprocal relationship. We act like we have no children, no grandchildren, it doesn't matter what happens after us. So the global ethics would be to take a democratic vote from the not yet born people and ask, what would you like? And then we use imagination. But it means we can't have a contract with them. Like, I do this for you, you do this for me. Typical Western thinking, I don't do anything for you if you don't do anything for me. That is gone philosophically. We have to do things for each other and for those yet not born. And if we do that, we benefit ourselves. If we get rid of the US empire, we will have a better world, but the United States will be a better place. I mean, think of the burden from that militarist alcoholism that they are suffering from, spending almost half of the world's military expenditures among, 350 million people. Think of what that money could do, and that's a concept of opportunity cost. Always, when you see a bill for the military or for warfare, ask yourself, what could I get instead for that? How could I invest that money constructively? What is the alternative consumption instead of this? And the moment you begin to think of that, you could, of course, sit down and cry, because every moment, for the hour we've been sitting here now, the world has lost billions of dollars on warfare, on arms production, while people are suffering, while people are dying, while people are hungry to bed. That does not need to happen. It's a matter of the perverse priorities of the world, which spends 400 times more on weapons than on the United Nations. That's a moral problem. That's an ethical problem. It's something that would be impossible if we had a global ethics. We only have a neighborhood Christian ethics, which is totally insufficient. I'm not saying everything is bad in it, but I'm saying it's insufficient. You need to build global thinking on it. And those are non-material things to round it off is what I deeply believe we've got to talk about in the future if we want to survive. We cannot be pragmatic all the time. We have to have goals. We have to have long-range thinking. We have to have macro thinking in terms of time and space. Long-term perspective, what will happen in the next 40, 50 years? How can we shape it ourselves? Macro thinking, the whole world, not just my own national society. Nationalism, as François Mitterrand said shortly before he died, nationalism means war. Globalism does not mean war, it means coexistence, hopefully based on the 5 principles of the Panchil from 1954. Let's pull out the good things. Let's pull out Gandhi. Let's put out Chu Enlai and Nero. Let's put out the people who've been thinking about what it means to be human, instead of listening, to influencers and foreign minister, press spokespeople, etc.